So the Biden administration continuing to push electric vehicles as demand for them grinds to a halt. Joining us now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer, member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, good to see you. Thank you for being here. I just want you to listen to a second to Pete Buttigieg. He was on one of the Sunday talk shows. I assume he thought he was going to get softballs, but he got a little pushback. Let me play that and get your reaction. Roll it.
They're going crazy with the electric car, costing us a fortune. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars subsidizing a car that nobody wants and nobody's ever going to buy.
He's not wrong.
He's
on
wrong.
The purchasing. He's not. Of the 4 million vehicles purchased, 269,000 electric vehicles were sold in the U.S. market. It's up like 2%.
All right. The bottom line is, Senator Cramer, is that when you get pushback, when the Bidens get pushback from the mainstream media, they know they're in trouble, right?
Well, that's for sure. And the mainstream media knows what we all know, and that is there's not a demand. In fact, their hope of a demand has obviously fallen flat. And the idea that somehow you can create demand by creating more supply, of course, only somebody who didn't take Economics 101 would fall for that. The reality is, in fact, when they try to subsidize any type of a product, all you do is you add that much. The amount of the subsidy gets added to the price of, in this case, the vehicle. So you really never create a true market, and that going that route. But what you do is create a glut of the product itself. And at the end of the day, people are very comfortable with their gas vehicles and their combustion engines because they're reliable and they know how to work on them. There's all kinds of benefits to.
And there may be reasons. I mean, there are people I know who have electric cars who are happy with them. Not in Chicago, by the way, after that last winter, and you discovered the battery problem with cold weather. But politicians and bureaucrats, when they spend our money, they don't do it as effectively as we do or as the market does in deciding what works and what doesn't. Isn't it that simple? I mean, just one other example is this $7.5 billion that has been spent sending up these charging stations all over the country. They only have 7 or 8 of them. 7 or 8. $7.5 billion. That doesn't add up.
It doesn't add up very well, that's for sure. And the goal was, the promise by Joe Biden was there'd be 500,000 of these charging stations. And you sort of touched on that point when you talk about Chicago and the fact that the batteries don't last long. In fact, when the temperature gets below 20 degrees below zero, they lose 40% of their battery life. And if you live someplace where it doesn't get 20 below, try North Dakota. It's fairly common for it to get 20 below zero. So that leaves probably half of our country out of the market for an electric vehicle. And the other thing, David, is it's largely wealthy people that do buy electric vehicles because they live in places and they can afford to have an extra car. They like the idea of an electric vehicle, but that doesn't even begin to talk about the fact that we don't have the electric generation and transmission that can support more of this demand for electricity. We've got AI eating up a lot of electricity. You've got cryptocurrency mining that takes up a lot of electricity. And again, it gets right back to the fundamental point of the market. The market is simply not there. There's not a demand for it. And you're seeing that, not just in the United States, by the way, but around the world. You're seeing the same phenomenon.
Well, they can't create markets, but they can destroy them.
That's
and they're trying to, in addition to pushing, with all of the subsidies that taxpayers are paying for, they're also creating new regulations that are very tough on gas-powered cars. Is it conceivable that they could force it? They're doing the same thing in states, by the way, with regard to natural gas ovens. We have all these new regs for ovens that make it almost impossible to have gas ovens now, even though, if you have an electric oven, hey, somebody's got to pay for that extra electricity. Of course, electricity also has to be created somehow, and it's not always able to be created by sun when it's cloudy or by wind when there's no wind.
Well, and gas furnaces. We just had a congressional review act vote last week on gas furnaces. To get a gas furnace that's 95%, and this is, by the way, gets to your point about regulation, a 95% efficient gas furnace ends up costing about $4,500 to $5,000 for a new furnace, which 60% of the furnaces in the country would have to be replaced. Or you can get an electric furnace, which is cheap, but then the cost of the fuel is double. There is no rationale for any of this stuff in the free market system.
And it leads to such distortions. it leads to distortions, not only market, but foreign policy distortions. I mean, now because of our foreign policy considerations, we're letting the Iranians produce a lot more oil than they were under the Donald Trump administration, and we're buying more oil from Venezuela. They produce it in a much dirtier fashion than we do. So if you want a clean environment, you produce it here where we have the regs to make sure it is a clean environment. Speaking of Iran, very quickly, we got the news over the weekend. It's shocking news that the Biden administration is now pressing our allies, our European allies, not to confront Iran on their nuclear program, which is advancing very quickly. When we are more liberal than, you know, France and the UK, I start to get a little worried. Do you?
Well, as do I, but this is just the latest example of a projection of weakness by this president. They have coddled Iran all along. Look at the way they're treating our friend Israel with withholding weapons, for example, offensive weapons that could help them put an end to the war against Iran via Hamas. The fact that we haven't sunk any of Iranian ships in the Red Sea when they're shooting at our sailors, it's mind-numbing to me. Yeah. The whole Iran nuclear deal is ridiculous. But you're right. It's not just the Iranian deal. There's lots of areas where NATO leadership now is calling on the United States to lift its restrictions on the use of its weapons by Ukraine. Ukraine is given these weapons, but they're not allowed to fire them at the source of the weapons that are coming back at them. It's an absolute projection of weakness, and it's a philosophy that most Americans and, frankly, a growing number of people around the world don't agree with.
Well, and it's why Donald Trump is hitting on common sense as the issue of this campaign in all areas, whether it's dealing with the border, foreign policy, economics, et cetera. Senator, great to see you. Thank you for being here. Senator Kevin Cramer.
Thanks, David.
Well, Joe